There's a lot of misunderstanding about leasing, and leasing is just another way to finance a car. When you buy a vehicle, you pay payments over a certain amount of time, and leasing is basically the same way. The big misunderstanding when people talk about leasing is one of the arguments that you hear about, I don't want to lease a car, I want to own my car. But let's be frank, if you finance 60 months or 72 months on a finance contract, you don't own the car until it's paid for. And leasing is just another way to finance a vehicle. So let's take a look at leasing in a kind of an elementary sense. First of all, if you were going to buy a large pizza and you knew you were only going to eat 3 of the 6 slices, there wouldn't be any reason to buy the whole pizza because you're only going to eat 3 of the 6 slices. Leasing is basically the same way. If you're going to use a vehicle over a certain amount of time, there's no sense in paying for the whole vehicle. You just want to pay for the portion of the vehicle that you're actually going to use. For example, I'm going to throw some terms out that you get in leasing that you might not get in a conventional purchase. And one of those terms is residual value. Basically, when we're talking about a lease, you have a 36 months, in Toyota's case, residual value, or what Toyota says that vehicle is going to be worth at the end of 3 years. So in a lease, instead of paying for the whole vehicle, you're only paying for the portion of the vehicle that you actually use. For example, if you were looking at a $30,000 vehicle, okay, and it had a 36-month residual of 50%, or Toyota says that vehicle is going to be worth $15,000 3 years from now. Instead of paying for that whole $30,000, you're only going to pay for the $15,000 of the vehicle that you actually use. Does that make sense? Great. Is leasing right for me? Well, these are the questions that you have to ask yourself. Do you trade every 3 years? You know, we see every day people coming in trading 3-year-old vehicles that are in 60 or 72 month contracts, and they have negative equity. If you're somebody that likes to trade every 3 years, what you have with a guaranteed residual is you know exactly what that car is going to be worth 36 months from now. And then you have some options that we'll talk about later when you get to that. But you never get to the end of a 36-month lease in negative equity. You're always at least at break even, as long as your miles and condition, again, and we'll talk about that later. So when we talk about leasing, how's the payment figured? The payment's figured on the money factor or interest and the amount of the depreciation that you're going to pay over 36 months. Let's say, again, for our example, we have a $30,000 vehicle that has a $15,000 residual. Your payment, you're responsible for the $15,000 that you're going to use and the interest on that amount. So if you trade every 3 years or so, if you drive 15, 20,000 miles a year or less, which is 90% of the American public, and you like a lower payment and more peace of mind, leasing may be right for you. Who's it not good for? If you're a person that keeps your car for 8, 9, 10, or 12 years, you probably don't want to look at leasing. If you're a person that drives 30 or 40,000 miles a year, you probably don't want to look at leasing. In a lease, you have an MSRP, or manufacturer's suggested retail price, just like you do in a conventional purchase. The residual value is based on that MSRP. And very fortunately for Toyota, and for us, being Toyota dealers, is Toyota has the highest resale value of any manufacturer. So the residual value of a Toyota is much higher than it is a lot of the other car manufacturers. So if my MSRP is $30,000, and I'm going to use a calculator, and my vehicle has a 65% residual, and I take $30,000 times 65%, that means my residual value is $19,500. You follow me? So what I'm going to pay for in that lease is the difference between $30,000 and $19,500. So if I take $30,000 and subtract off $19,500, I'm going to pay $10,500 of depreciation over the 36 months, or over 3 years, that vehicle's depreciation is going to cost me $3,500 a year to drive that car, plus the interest rate or money factor. And when I say I want to speak to what money factor, in leases we talk about in terms of money factor. In conventional financing we talk about interest rate, but money factor is another word for interest rate. Now, if you're talking about $3,500 a year divided by 12, you're talking about $291 a month plus interest over the life of the note. A lot of times what you see in a lease, because Toyota, for example, has a very strong residual value, that the vehicle's worth so much more at the end of 36 months than a lot of other vehicles. And especially if you look at domestic vehicles, their residual 36 month residual values are a lot of times 42%, 41%, 30%. So if you look at that same $30,000 vehicle that has a 40% residual value, that's $12,000, and that's way different than $19,500 on a vehicle that has 65% residual value. Basically, with Toyota Care, all your maintenance is taken care of. So you're not paying for oil changes, you're not paying for tire rotations, you're making one monthly payment, you're buying insurance and gas. That's what you have to pay. Here's the beauty of a lease, especially for our Missouri customers. There's no trip to the license bureau that you got to go pay $1,500 or $1,600, because in a lease you pay usage tax. And basically what that means is whatever your tax rate is in your hometown, if you're in Joplin, 7.35%, it's based on the payment. So let's say that your lease payment was $300 a month. Your tax would be figured on that payment, so it would be 1.0735. So your new payment would be $322.05 a month, but that includes your tax. So you lease a car from us, you come in here a couple weeks later, we give you your tags, you put them on your card, there's no trip to the license bureau, there's no worrying about $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 to go pay your taxes, and your payments are $322.05 a month for 36 months until you get to the end of your lease. Let's talk real clearly about what happens at the end of a lease. You have 4 options at the end of every lease. And this is why leasing a vehicle makes a lot more sense for most people than purchasing a vehicle. Because at the end of a lease, you are at least, like I said before, at break even. If you're on a 72-month finance contract, you get to the end of 3 years, there's a good chance that you have $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 in negative equity. So when you go to your next car, you're not only buying that next car, but you're dragging the negative equity into that next purchase. In a lease, you're at least at a break-even point. What could keep you from being at a break-even point, or that guaranteed residual value? Before you lease a car, you need to have a pretty good idea of how many miles a year that you drive. Because if you drive 12,000 miles a year and at the end of 36 months you've put 36,000 miles on that vehicle, then you're not going to have a mileage penalty. The only other thing that could affect the guaranteed residual value of that 36 months lease is excessive wear and tear. However, Toyota has a product called excess use that just adds a few dollars a month to your monthly payment, and that will let you bring that car in with bald tires or a cracked windshield, and your excess use warranty will take over and pay that, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's very, very clear that you understand this about leasing. You can turn it in, you can trade it in. So why would you do one and not the other? Well, if you trade the vehicle in, say the residual value is $19,500, but the car's still worth $20,500, and you've got $1,000 worth of equity. In that situation, you'd want to trade that car in, not turn it in, because you can capture that equity. Say you love the car and you say, I love this car, I'm not ready to give it up. Then you can refinance the balance, and a lot of times keep the same payment that you're paying on the lease, and go ahead and keep that car, because now on our example of that $19,500 residual value, you just refinance that $19,500 and keep it, pay it off over 3 years or 4 years and keep it. Or you can sell it to your neighbor, because you got to pay off on a lease just like you have a payoff on any other vehicle if you conventionally finance it. So you can turn it in. The only time you'd ever want to turn it in is if the guaranteed residual value was lower or was higher than what the vehicle's worth. For example, say the market fell out on a certain make or model and your guaranteed residual was 19.5, but you had the car appraised and it's only worth 16. That's not your problem. You grab the keys, you pay a $350 disposal fee, and you walk away. You have those options at the end of a 36-month lease that you don't have if you're in a 72-month finance contract and you get to the end of 36 months and you still got $3,000 or $4,000 worth of negative equity. How affordable is leasing? Brand new Toyota Corollas with 10% down, 10% cash down, are leasing now for $149 a month plus tax. Brand new Toyota Camrys with about $2,500 or 10% cash down are leasing for as little as $199 a month. I lease my car, my wife leases her car, my son, my daughter-in-law, her brother and sister, and my other son all lease their cars. We lease our cars because it just makes good sense. We buy gasoline and we buy car insurance. Toyota Care takes care of the maintenance, and every 3 years I get a new car, and it's usually $60, $80, $90, $100 a month less than what it would cost me if I was conventionally financed. I'm here every single day to answer any of your specific questions about leasing, but I just want to give you an overview on what leasing a vehicle at Frank Fletcher Toyota is all about. If you want to visit with me, my personal cell phone number is 620-249-6795, and we can go as far into the woods as we need to go into to make sure that you make an informed decision. Thanks for coming by.